Our second reading is from Genesis chapter number 32, beginning with verse number 22. The same night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, and his 11 children and crossed the ford of the river. He took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved." The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. May God bless the reading of this word. May God bless us in our hearing of this word so that we might hear in it a word that is to us and that is for us on this day. Jacob is one of the Bible's more interesting characters, albeit not one of its more admirable characters. Rather infamously, Jacob was born a twin, leaving the womb right on the heel of his barely older brother Esau. But in Jacob and Esau's world, those few moments by which Esau became the oldest son made all the difference. There were many rights and privileges associated with being the oldest male, and those by right of birth would belong to Esau. However, Jacob was a few things. Jacob was clever. Jacob was deceitful. And maybe the biggest advantage that he had, he was his mom's favorite. Esau, on the other hand, was a little more brawn than brain and wasn't quite up to resisting Jacob's wiles. Jacob would eventually cheat him out of his birthright, and then with his mother's help would cheat Esau out of his father's blessing as his father died. Without getting into many of the details, Esau and Jacob both made some decisions. Esau decided that the world would be a better place without Jacob in it. Jacob decided that given his brother's state of mind, he'd be better off taking a lengthy vacation from home. From there, he continued to live a life of dishonesty and deceit, leading up to the text that we have read this morning, where we discover that he has been busy. Jacob has now 2 wives, 11 children, and 2 maids. And I think when we're picturing those maids, we shouldn't picture Alice on the Brady Bunch, in case you're working on a mental picture there. I also like to mention Jacob's 2 wives and 2 maids when someone tells me that they want to return to a biblical form of marriage. I say, do you now? Do you really? He had also acquired a good many flocks and herds of various sorts, and so it's apparent that Jacob has not been idle. But more than anything else, what Jacob has been doing has been avoiding his brother Esau, who, as far as he knows, still thinks the world would be better without Jacob breathing any of its air. When we find him now, you might say the gig is up. The day has come, and when there's no more avoiding Esau. And so in one last, less than heroic really cowardly act, he sent his 2 wives and his 11 children and his 2 maids and his flocks and his herds across the river to meet Esau, playing on his sympathies and hopefully sort of serving as a shield. All of this is a very quick snapshot of Jacob and what brings him to this moment in time, this moment where we find him in our text. It is a moment when he is alone. It is a moment when he is scared. It is a moment when he is facing a reckoning. We might wonder why this morally ambiguous, unheroic person has become such an important part of our Judeo-Christian history and experience. Up to this point, he has been almost an anti-hero. Now, I want to offer you a few reasons, and these are by no means are these exhaustive, but I want to give you a few reasons why Jacob should matter to us. But even before that, let me say that he is a reminder to us to grow up. That sounds strange, but he is a reminder of us to grow up and to get past the self-deprecating language we use to understand ourselves and the limitations we place on ourselves regarding how we can be used by God and be a part of God's story in light of our own histories and our own moral ambiguities. The Bible is a story from Genesis to Revelation of a God who uses imperfect, flawed people for divine purposes. We can't be reminded of that too often. In a world so polarized and full of hostilities, so fragmented, so turned against one another as we are because of fear, in a world so palpably in need of hope, in a world living in the wreckage of poverty, we cannot be encumbered by infantile notions of self-loathing which exclude us from being a part of those divine movements which bring reconciliation and solidarity and hope. For you see, you and I, we're as likely as anybody else to be the hands and feet of Christ in this world. But back to those reasons why Jacob is such an important piece of our history and our story. First, he faced himself. He had plenty of cowardly moments, but in this one moment, we find him facing himself and coming to terms with who he was. As he wrestles with this one who initially seems to be human, but as the story unfolds, becomes a divine being of sorts, he's asked by this being, "What is your name?" Now remember, in the ancient world, names meant more than they do to us. Names are descriptors. They give telltale signs and indicators of a person's character. In asking for Jacob's name, he is being asked, "Who are you really?" And Jacob announces his name. He says, "My name is Jacob," a word which literally means heel. He is one who came into the world grasping at his brother's heel and continued throughout life to be grasping and conniving and scheming and taking whatever he could get in any way that he could get it. This past Tuesday, some of you might know this, October 11th was National Coming Out Day. And that can mean many things. It is a day for LGBTQ persons to celebrate and to be celebrated for the courageous step that was their own coming out. It is a day to be reminded that we are all in the business of creating a world where it is safer to come out. And I believe it is a day when we stand in solidarity with those still struggling to come out. But for me, and this is just one person's take, it is a reminder that the great spiritual task of my life and yours, all of us, is to live honestly and authentically. I found the courage of my LGBTQ friends to be an inspiration as I wrestle with my own inclinations to hide parts of myself. As I wrestle with the divine call which is placed on all of our lives to live in truthfulness and authenticity. That is what this moment was for Jacob. That is what this wrestling match is all about. It is a coming clean. It is a coming out of his own closet of hiding. And whoever we are, that takes courage. It takes guts to see clearly who we are and to be seen for who we are. It takes guts, but it leads to life. Jacob is important to us because standing alone in the dark, he took that moment and he said, "This is who I am." And life for him started anew. Second, Jacob is important to us because having seen who he was, he acknowledged his brokenness, and he even left this encounter more broken, limping home, literally, limping home. But rather than being defined by his brokenness, he let it open him up to new possibilities. While I will forgive you for forgetting, I have not forgotten my first sermon with you. Anybody remember what it was about? Okay, thank you. I preached it as we stared at one another through computer screens, as Zoom meetings were just becoming an integral part of our lives, just as we were learning that one could wear a nice shirt with pajama bottoms to church and nobody would be the wiser. I shared a story that morning about acclaimed author Reynolds Price, and some of you seem to resonate with it. I will offer it to you again. In 1984, he discovered that he had a large tumor on his spinal cord. He went through surgery, radiation, and yet it all ended in paralysis from the waist down. After that experience, he wrote a book titled A Whole New Life. I want to read an excerpt from it which describes why he wrote it, and I think that it's worth hearing. He said he wrote the book in order to offer useful instruction in how to absorb the staggering but not quite lethal blow of a fist that ends your former life and offers you nothing in the way of a new life that you can even begin to think of wanting. When it happens, your mate, your children, your friends at work, anyone who knew you or loved you in your old life will be hard at work in the fierce endeavor to revive your old self, the self they recall with love and respect. Their motives are often frequently admirable, and at times that effort counts for a lot. They prove that you are valued and wanted at least, but again, their care is often a break in the way that you must go. At the crucial juncture when you turn toward the future, they're likely to have little help to offer. More likely, they'll stall you in the effort to learn who you need to be now and how to be him or her tomorrow or Monday at the latest. The kindest thing anyone could have done for me once I finished 5 weeks of radiation would have been to look me square in the eye and say clearly, "Reynolds Price is dead. Who will you be now? Who can you be? And how can you get there double time?" What he needed most to hear, Reynolds Price wrote, were the words, "Come back to life, whoever you will be." Even shy of such a traumatic event, none of us are what we used to be, are we? And it is in the cracks and fractures that appear along the way, the fractures in our bodies and in our spirits. It is there where something of God's light seeps in. Brokenness leads to grace, and grace slips into the cracks in the form of light, making it possible for things like compassion and generosity and gratitude to make a home in our hearts, in our beings. Richard Rohr is right when he says, all great spirituality is about what we do with our pain. how we live after we have been hurt, how we live after innocence has been lost, how we live once we can no longer deny our mortality and fallibility. Jacob is important to us because he was wounded, but once wounded, he limped toward his new vocation. That's important and bears repeating. Only after being wounded could Jacob embrace the call that God had placed on his life. As the story concludes, the one who wrestled with Jacob gave him a new name. This man, or this divine being, refuses to let Jacob believe that what he has been is all that he can be. He has been duplicitous, a cheat, a scoundrel, a man on the run. But you see, there's more to him. There's more to him, and he is given a new name, Israel, which means the one who wrestled with man and God and prevailed. My friends, there is always more to us. Jacob, who became Israel, is important to us because he came to believe that there was more within him. And this is the conviction which must drive us these days more than ever. There is more to us. We may be limping a little and we may be a bit broken, but those cracks provide the place where grace slips in and works in a transformative manner in our lives. As we gather together, there is also more in us together. We can work together as Christians and Jews and Muslims and Buddhists and agnostics and atheists as long as we believe that there is more in us together. Something that can still emerge. Those with GEDs can work with those with PhDs and everything in between, as long as we believe that there is more in us together. Those with white skin and black skin and brown skin can work together as long as we believe and we know in the core of our beings that there's still something in us that is yet to emerge. This is the conviction which will fuel our spirits and help us to avoid the cynicism and the skepticism and the despair which threatens the soul of our nation and the world. People of light cannot give into that or get stuck in that mud. This conviction must be greater than the malaise which would keep us out of the voting booths or out of the public square or out of the conversations and affirming actions which would address all the divides which leave us fragmented. This conviction is that which will drive us into the streets and into the hospitals and into the prisons, to the rock bottom, scorched earth places where people are asking this question as if it is a matter of life or death. Is there more to me? Is there more to us? From this place where we stand, is there something that is still to sprout and take life and to emerge? And before we go, let me say this about this single community of faith, which is the Congregational Church of Pinehurst, this small but growing and vital church. There is more to us which hasn't been seen yet. There is a place for all of our gifts. There is a place for idea people. Those idea people who get excited about an idea before they even know if it'll work. And there's a place for those that say, wait a minute, let's talk about it. There's a place for the spenders and there's a place for the penny pinchers. There's a place for the doers and there's a place for the thinkers. There's a place for all of us just so long as we're living and being in that breeze of reminder that there is still more to us. Jacob is important to us because he became Israel, and he stands as an eternal witness to people like you and me. His memory calls us away from cynicism, calls us away from skepticism, calls us away from despair, and calls us toward the hope which is born when we know that there is indeed more to us. And someday it will emerge. It will rise up. And what a grand thing it will be to see. Amen.